Emotions. We all have them. Sometimes it feels like they control us. Other times it feels like we control them. But which is true? How much do we actually know about our own emotions? Emotions seem to be part of the human experience from day one. As newborns, we show evidence of interest, surprise, distress, and contentment. By 4 months of age, we can express anger. And by 6 months, fear and shyness become part of our emotional repertoire. By adulthood, we experience a full range of emotions, and there are fewer places one is more likely to encounter them than at a youth soccer game. '89 Extreme is a boys under 11 team from Phoenix, Arizona, playing in their third tournament.
My team, it's a fairly new team. I think that the core of the team was put together this year, and they've been working together for probably 6 months now. They're a real good group of kids. They're very willing to learn. They're real willing to work hard and practice, and I think they're pretty committed to become good soccer players.
With every group of young soccer players comes a group of parents with varying degrees of investment.
You see the pacers, people that pace, and the people that just walk off into the corner because they know they're about to get in trouble. And you see the parents that just sit there and just chat the whole game. And, oh, what's the score? What's the score? And then, this is really everything in between.
According to emotion researchers, we seem to have 6 basic emotions. Fear, anger, happiness, sadness, disgust, and surprise seem to be common to all humans, regardless of culture or ethnic group. However, we rarely feel just one emotion at a time. Most often we experience blends and mixtures of emotions that are sometimes confusing. But why do we feel emotions at all? What good do they do us?
Emotions reflect the attempt of the individual to deal with issues in the world, typically dealing with problems in the world.
For example, anger is elicited when a person's goal is obstructed and some sort of action is required in order to keep that goal or reinstate that goal. And sometimes that action is attack. Fear is elicited when there's a perception that a goal is likely to fail in the future and preventative action is required, such as running away. Disgust keeps us from ingesting food that's going to harm us. Happiness captivates people. A smile captivates people, brings them closer, encourages them to continue doing the beneficial thing that they've been doing. So emotions really help in survival in all of those different ways.
Many of the emotions we feel have no seeming connection with survival. Our lives do not depend on a soccer ball hitting the goal, although it may be hard to convince some fans of that.
Help him! Yes! Oh!
Emotions, then, play a different role.
The human is a social animal, and what is it that bonds us together? What is it that bonds parent with child and child with friend and one group with another? It's emotion. It's sharing emotions with each other, and it's attempting to negotiate through conflict.
All emotions are biological events. Even when our physical survival is not at risk, our bodies respond as though it were.
I have a knot in my stomach from a little frustration that they're not scoring more or preventing the other team from scoring.
Well, I kind of feel my face getting tense, and then just kind of a pit in my stomach. Hands get sweaty, maybe.
I feel my heart going thud, 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 thud. When you're like sad, you don't have as much energy in you, and then when you're excited, you're like all over the place, laughing your heart out.
You're always feeling it in the pit of your stomach. I mean, if you have any, if you have a son or a daughter that's playing in any athletics, I mean, everything's in the stomach.
The work on physiology and emotion has shifted over the last few decades. When I first became a research psychologist and started working on the emotions, the emphasis physiologically was on the autonomic nervous system, heart rate, blood pressure, skin temperature, and skin sweating. And the attempt was made to try to differentiate the emotions using those kinds of physiological indicators. That attempt yielded mixed results, I think it's fair to say. What we've seen in the late 90s and the early part of this new millennium is a shift, I think, from the autonomic nervous system to the central nervous system. Work really on the brain and on different parts of the brain that seem involved in different kinds of emotional experiences.
The brain shows major signs of arousal and major ways of patterning depending upon the intensity of the emotion that's being registered. The more intense the emotion, the faster the brain waves are. The quality of the emotion is also represented with left frontal brain regions being active principally in states of positive emotion, and right regions principally in times of negative emotion.
It's possible to have a stroke, a massive injury in the frontal lobe on the left side, and as the individual is repaired, recovers from the stroke, it's almost always noticed that this individual has a rather sour, cynical, depressed look on life. On the other hand, if he or she had had the stroke on the right side and began to recover, they more often turn out to be like the little character on the cover of Mad magazine. You know what? Me worry? What's to worry about? The stroke was nothing. So there's a very different take that these two frontal lobe parts show on the world around them.
Unlike stroke victims, however, most people process a full range of both negative and positive emotions.
It's interesting to see how emotions can change so quickly, because you're frustrated. There were some bad calls, and that's always a continuing frustration in a soccer game. And so you're watching it and you're going, come on, you're really frustrated. And the next thing you know, you get a goal and you're like, you're all happy, and it's like a whole new life.
Oh, good job, Carlos.
As we experience the ups and downs of our emotions, we often wonder where they come from. There seem to be 4 basic components that work together to create emotion: physiological arousal, cognitive appraisal, or what we think, the subjective experience, our internal feelings, and the expression of that experience, our behavior. The subjective experience is personal. There is no way we can know if frustration feels the same way for this child or that father. What psychologists have been able to determine is that emotion is an interaction of these 4 elements. But which comes first? How does it all start?
William James argued that arousal comes first. His theory, and that of Carl Lang, a Danish physiologist, was that certain stimuli elicit physiological changes and behaviors, emotional behaviors, and our perception of those changes and behaviors is the emotional experience. So, for example, Let's suppose a huge dog comes leaping at you, barking loudly. That causes your heart to pound, your breath to come faster, your muscles to tense, and your perception of those changes is fear. In 1914, Walter Cannon pointed out some serious problems with the James Lange theory of emotion. He pointed out, for one thing, that the same pattern of physiological arousal, such as increased heart rate, seems to typify lots of different emotions, such as anger and fear, and for that matter, non-emotional experiences like vigorous exercise. So that raises the question, if you experience your heart pounding, how do you know if you feel angry, afraid, or just ran around the block?
Cannon and physiologist Philip Bard proposed a different theory, that physiological arousal and the subjective feeling happen at the same time because information about the stimulus is sent to the cortex and sympathetic nervous system simultaneously. So you would feel fear at the same instant your heart begins to pound. But later researchers saw problems with both of these theories.
They have in common the view of emotions as an instinctive reaction, a passive reaction. They see the emotion system as a more primitive system than rational thought. And they view emotion and reason as being at odds with each other. They also have in common the view that although emotions in our long distant past as a species used to be adaptive, they're much less so now. So if a predator is leaping toward you, it's quite adaptive to flee. On the other hand, if you're facing your dissertation committee and you're defending your thesis, fleeing from the room is not an adaptive response.
More recent theories of emotion stress the role cognition plays in determining what we feel. For example, the two-factor theory of emotion proposed by Stanley Schachter.
Schachter had a theory that was sometimes called a two-factor or jukebox theory. It was the idea that first the body had to simply get aroused, and he viewed arousal as a very global, general response that wasn't differentiated by emotions until the second factor happened. And the second factor was the person would look around and try to figure out why they were experiencing this unexplained arousal. And when they found something reasonable to attribute the arousal to, that determined the precise emotion. It was called the jukebox theory. It's like the jukebox has to be turned on. It's running, it's aroused, but until you push the button, no particular piece of music comes on the jukebox.
We should be a little disappointed. Losing 7-2 is not good. That's a good team, but not that good. Not that good that it should be 7-2. So more heart and smarter. We played right into their hands. Was that our style of soccer in the first half? Even this, it wasn't our style of soccer.
Researcher Richard Lazarus developed yet another theory of emotion. This one states that our thoughts determine the emotion we will experience. For instance, a parent might look sad about losing a tournament match, but may be inwardly rejoicing because the family can go home sooner. In this case, it would not be the loss that determines the emotion. It would be the parent's perception of what that means. The cognitive appraisal of the situation determines the feeling.
Julie, do you guys know what happens if we lose both games today? Do we play tomorrow? Yeah, we play tomorrow.
We see the role our thinking processes play in emotion whenever we attempt to explain why we feel as we do.
Well, I was kind of mad because we weren't playing our hardest, so I wanted to, throw something or something like that.
Sad because we shouldn't have played harder.
I was kind of mad and angry because we could have played harder and we weren't really listening to what our coach was saying on the sidelines.
My brain's telling me to just forget it, and because we have a next game, and so we'll do better in that one.
Regardless of what causes our subjective feelings, our emotional experience is not complete until there is some sort of behavioral expression that others can recognize and interpret. While there are many cues to what a person is feeling, the one we rely upon most is the face.
The face is the best window we have for knowing what someone's about to do next. It's a signal system that's quite precise. You can capture an expression in a fraction of a second. You can recognize expressions one from another at distances of over 20 meters. So it's not just an intimate, but a fairly long distance.
Paul Ekman's work demonstrated that facial expressions are similar across cultures.
I began my research on facial expression really more than 30 years ago. It was quite uncertain as to whether expressions were like language and gestures learned and therefore different in each culture, or whether they were, as Darwin had suggested 100 years earlier, the product of our evolution and universal. I thought they were learned, and my research proved me wrong, and I did research in about 5 literate cultures, in Japan and a couple of countries in South America and here. I showed people faces and asked them to tell me what emotion they saw in the face, and they all came up with pretty much the same answer. There was a loophole, however, which is that all these people had been exposed to the same mass media. So it could have been John Wayne that they learned their expressions from, not the product of their evolution. So in 1967 and again in 68, I went to what was then a Stone Age, pre-literate, isolated culture in the highlands of New Guinea. So I could find people who had no contact with the outside world, and they would not have had an opportunity to learn their expressions. The research I did was to show them pictures, tell them a story, like your friends have come, and I'd show them 3 pictures. Point to the picture, your friends have come, or you're about to fight. Point, I again show them 3 different pictures, point to the one we were about to fight. And then the other task I did was really just to reverse it. I'd tell them a story and say, show it to me on your face. Then I took their facial expressions and I showed them to students at San Francisco State College. Well, the San Francisco State College students were to hear them speak. They had no idea what they're saying. But when I showed them the expressions, they had no problem whatsoever. They could understand them completely.
But our faces rarely tell the whole story. More recent research has looked at a bigger picture.
The need is to understand how the face essentially relates to other aspects of the individual. For example, a baby or a child or even an adult does not have to show sadness in face. The sadness might be best indicated by just looking at the general behavior. In fact, if you want to understand whether a baby is in a negative or a sad emotional state or not, study the baby's or the child's play behavior. It may not be evident in the face that the child is sad, but it certainly will be evident in behavior.
I dragged all this way to not even play.
The way we express our emotions varies with the situation, our culture, our gender, and our social group, and with what we want to communicate.
So take your time and look to play to someone's feet.
There are definite guidelines for this, called display rules.
If a grandmother puts her all into giving a present to a 6-year-old who is expecting a Game Boy and instead gets a bar of soap, it would be very not harmonious for the child at 6 years of age, to show disappointment at the gift. As part of the human condition, our society builds into us display rules so that we express an emotion that's designed to have a good effect on other people.
The parents that I most admire are the ones that could just sit there and speak the truth and not be emotional about the game, because those are the ones that just march on and do this week in and week out. And you know, it's funny, I can do that 9 games out of 10, but every once in a while I don't. You know, I don't try and control how I feel.
There are occasions when we don't want to reveal how we feel. And we all know that the facial muscles are not just an involuntary system that produce the emotional expressions, but I can fabricate, I can put on a smile even if I'm not enjoying myself. We can almost always see beneath the mask. But it depends. Some people have stronger emotional responses than others. If you have very fast, strong emotional responses, it can be harder to mask. If you have slower more moderate emotional response is going to be easier to mask.
Display rules vary from group to group and from culture to culture. People become uneasy when the display rules of their group are broken.
Most Americans have a terrible time in Japan because the Japanese smile when they're not happy. Well, we smile when we're not happy too, but we don't do it as much as the Japanese. The Japanese don't want to give you negative messages. In fact, if you put them in a position where they have to give you a negative message, you've been extraordinarily rude. You've confirmed their belief that all Caucasians are barbarians. They just don't ever want to say no, and they don't to each other. You can sense the no by the manner of the conversation. That just doesn't fit how we and most Western Europeans behave.
In our culture, there are different display rules for men and women.
And it's usually the dads that get up and just walk off into the corner because they know they're going to say something they're going to regret. For some reason, the women seem to be able to stay more calm than the men.
When women get angry, they cry. When men get angry, they swear and they, hit things and so forth. And so, again, the expression of anger on the part of men, which is very physical, is considered okay. You're angry, so you shout and you swear and so on. But with women, when we get angry, we don't usually shout, swear, hit, but we cry.
It was a difference in display rules that caused an uproar in 1999 when U.S. women's soccer star Brandi Chastain celebrated victory in a very male way.
She, at the end of the game, squatted down and took her T-shirt off, and there was a sports bra underneath it, and everybody, went, wow. Well, there again, it gets to our stereotypes about men and women. If she hadn't had a sports bra on, I think it would have been worthy of coverage. But, you go to any gym, and that's what women are wearing. So I don't know, what was she supposed to do? Just sit there and wait for someone to give her flowers?
Learning the display rules by which others live helps us to develop and maintain our relationships.
I find myself just kind of checking to see his response to certain things that go on the field. Facial expressions kind of tell me where he's at a lot. You can see a kind of a growl on his face that he gets going, and but I thought that he always handles his emotions pretty well.
I think we're pretty similar in how we do it. I can be a little more volatile, though.
I can be fairly silent about my emotions, and I think that's a clue to him that things aren't going well.
Yeah.
Following the display rules of our group is just one part of navigating emotional waters. Equally important is developing an awareness of our emotional responses and the skills to manage them. Peter Salovey and his colleagues call this emotional intelligence and have identified 4 basic skill sets.
One having to do with the ability to identify, perceive emotions, and express them. Now that is identifying them and expressing them in self and in others. So I have to be able to understand what I'm feeling, but I also have to be able to understand what you're feeling.
She gets frustrated, yeah, definitely. How do I know? Facial expressions, actions, tone of voice, those type of things. What she says.
Second skill in the emotional intelligence framework is understanding emotions. This has to do with understanding, for example, the transitions that emotions make over time. For example, why is it that a small irritation can lead to anger? Why is it that anger can lead to rage?
Frustration feels very tense. You can feel your whole body tense up, and sometimes after a really tough game, maybe like intensity is also, sort of a feeling. And by the end of a frustrating game or an intense game, you can be exhausted.
The third skill in the emotional intelligence framework is using emotions. We know, for example, that certain negative emotions make it easier to think carefully and deductively. When people are feeling positive moods, they're more likely to make novel associations, be creative, come up with solutions to problems that they've never had before. And so our emotions help us differently depending on the feeling and depending on the task at hand.
Yeah, I think that it's good to get them fired up, and it seems like that's what they needed to be successful in the second half.
Yeah. The fourth and final branch organizes skills around regulating emotion, managing emotion. I have to be able to manage my anxieties. It'd be very difficult to do this interview if I was overcome with fear and anxiety.
Score is 3-1.
No, it's 4-1.
Our cognitive appraisals help us to understand and regulate emotions during the tough times, like losing 2 games in a row.
I think that the kids should feel pretty good. I think they feel pretty good about themselves. They're 11-year-old kids, and they're having a good time, and I think they realize too that they can learn from getting beat like that, and that's kind of the attitude they have.
But I'm actually happy that we just got beat because it's a good experience of facing a team as hard. So next time we'll be ready for playing a team that's just as hard.
I'll try to look at what they are doing right. Or, someone's out there with an effort, and you got to find it and just work with that.
It really doesn't make any difference whether you win or lose the game. What matters is what's happening with your child out there. And even if the score is miserable, if your child has done well and has played a good game, it feels good.
This whole weekend's an experiment. We haven't played soccer in 6 weeks, so we play against a good team like this today. It's tough, but we're going to get better, right? Each game. We learn. This is great.
As long as soccer teams lose tournaments, coaches, players, and parents will have plenty of opportunity to feel and express their emotions. As uncomfortable as they may be in times like these, emotions are an essential part of the human experience.